I'm Bree Luck, and you are listening to the Pause to Go podcast, where we explore the process of turning life's transitions into stellar transformations. You can expect interviews with experts, straight talk with remarkable humans, and conversations about making the most of every phase of life. Because when we approach life's stickiest spots with curiosity, support, and a little bit of inspiration, anything is possible. So whether you're on your way to work or settling in with your favorite beverage, together we can pause to go. As a solopreneur, I really like the flexibility to work from pretty much anywhere, so I'm happy to head down to Code-Based Co-working, where I can enjoy the company of others while I tackle my to-do list. Also, they have a state-of-the-art, consumer-friendly podcasting studio that is frankly my home away from home. So head over to Code-Based Co-working, check it out, and when you do, tell them that Bree sent you. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Heather Corinna, a dedicated queer feminist activist, author, educator, artist, teacher, organizer, and innovator who grows big things from small seeds and works to create, cultivate, and support positive growth and change. Heather is the founder, director, designer, and editor of the web clearinghouse and organization Scarleteen, the first truly comprehensive sex, sexuality, and relationship education site and resource for young people of its kind. Heather and the rest of the team at Scarleteen have provided millions of young people accurate and inclusive information and support every year for more than 20 years. And if you love a teenager, please check out Scarleteen and share it with your kid. It's such a valuable resource. Heather is also the author of the inclusive, comprehensive, and progressive sex, sexual health, and relationship book for young adults, SEX, the All You Need to Know Sexuality Guide to Get You Through Your Teens and 20s, now in its second edition. And also Wait, a comic book guide to relationships, bodies, and growing up for older middle readers and younger teens. And they recently wrote the new, highly inclusive memoir/survival guide, What Fresh Hell Is This? Perimenopause, Menopause, Other Indignities, and You, which came out this summer. They've been a sexuality and contraception and abortion educator and counselor for the Cedar Rivers Clinic's Feminist Women's Health Center and the director of the Connect Teen Outreach and Education Program in Seattle, which primarily served transient, homeless youth and reproductive health patients. They're a previous member of the editorial board for the American Journal of Sexuality Education, and they are a writer and contributing editor for the 2011 edition of Our Bodies, Ourselves, and their sexuality advice column was previously syndicated at RH Reality Check Rewire. They were also a lead plaintiff in the ACLU versus Gonzalez case, arguing against the Child Online Protection Act, COPA, which would have removed young adults' access to needed sexuality information. I mean, truly, y'all, Heather is a rock star. I read Heather's book, What Fresh Hell Is This, over the summer, and I have to say that the idea of interviewing them was a big motivation for making this an interview formatted podcast. So this week, you get to hear my conversation with Heather. And when Heather and I jumped on the line, we leapt right into the meat of this conversation. I mean, before any niceties, before I could even press record, we were off. So as you join in, you'll hear me showing Heather my copy of their book. It is marked up, tabbed up, dog-eared, annotated, and very, very loved. I truly think this is a book that every person who stands a chance at going through menopause should read. And that includes not only my Gen X comrades, but also millennials and forward-thinking young adults of Gen Z. This book also provides a section written by Joanne Mason about menopause for people born with testicular systems, which is wonderfully informative and expansive for those of us who forget that menopause affects us all in some way. And because I love this book so freaking much, this week I'm doing a giveaway. So if you submit a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts, I'll select one person from among those who leave a review, and that one person will receive a copy of Heather's book. You can have my copy that's annotated, or you can choose a nice, fresh, clean version. It'll be up to the winner, and I'll announce the winner on next week's episode. Just so you know, the one thing a lot of people ask me, what can I do to help support you with your podcast? And the one thing that you can really do is to leave a 5-star review and a written review on Apple Podcasts. That goes for any podcaster, not just me. Sharing with other people is the best thing you can do for a podcaster. I do want to point out before we dive into this conversation that this episode has a fair amount of profanity in it. It is warranted profanity, but if you have little kids around and you don't want them to hear, then you might want to put on headphones. And if you struggle with body dysmorphia or an eating disorder, I just want to let you know that we discuss topics related to these issues in depth. And I wanted to let you know before you start listening. But for now, just enjoy this episode about what fresh hell is this. I have to show you, Heather. Let me show you the book.
Oh, your tabs? Do you have good tabs? Oh my God, it's beautiful. I have a couple of books like that I did research on that I got rid of because I hated them instead of loving them. And I put them in the free little libraries here. And I think, first of all, do the people in my neighborhood appreciate that I've basically overwhelmed all of the free little library books with menopause books and with the menopause books that I didn't like? Secondly, are they what's with all these tabs? Because I thought I should take them off, and then I'm like, I don't have time.
No, I love it. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to find your book and why it's so special to me.
Sure, I love this story.
So I'm a coach, and I have had a number of clients in the last year. Many of my clients have been in their 20s and 30s, but then suddenly I had an influx this summer of people, mostly women in their 40s and 50s. And I realized that there were certain themes that kept coming up that were so obvious and overwhelming that I was like, there's something underneath this, right? I'm also 48. Menopause had been something that was sort of like, oh, it will happen someday. Like many people, I really had no real idea that I was in perimenopause. And this summer in August, I woke up one morning. I live in Virginia. We had our windows open and it was quite warm. And I woke up and I thought, I think I'm having a hot flash because I was sweating and hot. And I said to my husband, I think I'm having a hot flash. And he said, oh, no. It's just August. And it may be that it was August, but I realized, first of all, I have no idea. I have no idea what a hot flash means. And I'm scared. I mean, I was almost embarrassed to tell him, I think I may have had a hot flash. This is the person I trust with everything in my life. And so then I told my kids, hey, kids, I think I may have had a hot flash. And they said, oh, no, you're too young for that. You're too young. And so I thought, okay, this is really hitting a sensitive spot. And I hate that I'm supposed to be comforted by them saying, you're too young. And no, it's August. And there's something really wrong with that. So I immediately went to the bookstore and I just sat in the health section and was truly just looking at all of the books and looking for something that didn't say ladies in it because it just doesn't resonate with me. And your book truly fell into my lap. And and I read half of it in the bookstore, and then well, maybe, I mean, I skimmed half of it in the bookstore. It's a meaty book. It has a lot in it. I mean, your recording is 12 hours, right?
Something like that.
And then I took it home and started really marking it up. And I bought several other books as well. But I have to say that one has really resonated the most with me. And I appreciate really a non-gendered look at menopause. But what I really appreciate is the full holistic and cultural look, and the way that it really made me question on a deep and supported level, and supported in part because you offered just a really great resource for exploring some of these questions, but also because you say, hey, get support in the book, but a really supported way of looking at the conditioning that we've all been exposed to, and that we either wrestle against or are completely unaware of. And so anyway, that is my story of finding your book.
That's a good story. I mean, yeah, we experience it here. Like we can't experience this in a vacuum, and we can't divorce our menopause experience and our perimenopause experience from the culture in which it's happening, right? And we can't kind of piece it apart and be like, oh, there's the cultural piece and then there's the not cultural piece, right? Like, I mean, who could possibly figure that out? I mean, it's just, and of course, all of our cultural pieces are not exactly the same, because our cultures and our communities and all of these things are not exactly the same, nor are our experiences, of course, and our cultures and our communities the same. But yeah, you can't possibly untangle them, and we can't experience it in a vacuum. We can't be like, oh, well, the cultural treatment of this sucks, so I'm just going to divorce myself from that and go over here and have this wonderful utopian experience of perimenopause and menopause separate from all of that. I mean, that would be amazing.
Well, maybe it would be amazing, but maybe not. Maybe, I mean, and I will say I'm an optimist, and I guess that there's also a part of me that says, look, Bree, this is part of your activism. This is part of taking a deeper look at social justice, at medical equity, at ways to have a larger effect in the world. This is a real opportunity to really look at the suffering and understand it from a personal and physical level, and also make cultural changes and social changes. And I don't expect everyone to feel that way. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for your book, because I think for people who are interested in that, it's a great way in.
Right. Well, I think too, it's interesting because the timing that when I started doing sex ed work for younger people, the cohort of people that I was doing it for were really people that at the time that I started doing it were about 10 to 15 years younger than me. And really, that same cohort right now is just entering or just about to enter perimenopause. We're also, those of us who are in the thick of it or have just kind of crossed over, also in a position to help millennials that are coming into this, so that their experience is a very different one, certainly a very different one than the generation before ours had, but even a very different one than we had. I mean, all of us talking even right now make it so that a lot of millennials are not going to be having the experience where they are thinking I'm too young, or this is not on their radar at 35 or 40. For somebody 40 right now paying any attention to media, it is in fact now on their radar.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It is. And it won't take away the struggle of it, but it might give them greater resources earlier, so they're not blindsided by it.
Absolutely. Well, and there's a lot of there are a lot of things that you can do to prepare yourself to make it a lot easier. And certainly there are some things that, even if there are things that are going to be harder for you because of your genetics, because of pre-existing conditions, because of your life circumstances, that you can make adjustments, or you can get medications ahead of time, or you can add things to your world and your life, or what you eat, or what you do for yourself ahead of time, to make it a little bit easier, that are much harder to add and adjust for when you're in the thick of it and you're overwhelmed. And also too, life collides in a really bad way for so many of us in our later 40s. I had a lot of stuff going on. I mean, my whole life has been kind of a shit show for so much of the time period, but certainly in my early 40s, I had a lot less just kind of, caving in on me as far as just kind of midlife stuff happening than I did in my later 40s. So I, would have had more ability to kind of do some things for myself than I did when I had all of these spinning plates, with things with elder care, with other health conditions coming for me, with my partner's kids, with all this stuff going on. So the timing makes a difference too, I think.
It does. So let's take a step back. And let me start with the question that I ask everyone on the podcast, which is, how old are you? And where are you in the perimenopause, menopause process now? I know where you were in the book. Where are you now?
This is a very exciting answer that I have. I'm 51, and on October 21st, I finally reached menopause. So I did, for the longest time, I didn't actually believe, like, I was like, bullshit, it's going to happen to everybody else, and I will be the person who's in perimenopause forever. I will write a next book that I'm like still in hell, right? Like I will be like in the Guinness Book of World Records as like the oldest person reached menopause. But, unlike, almost nothing is average for me, but I'm like, I reached menopause at like the average age of menopause. So there it is. There it is. And, this year has really been awful for me in a lot of ways so far. But I will say that, they generally kind of say that a lot of the kind of biggest impacts of the whole menopausal transition in terms of vasomotor stuff, a lot of stuff tend to be the year or two right around menopause, but that generally after menopause, stuff does get better. And there are a lot of, from reading the book, I had a very hard time.
Heather had a very hard perimenopause process.
Yeah, it was not fun. It was just not fun. And vasomotor stuff, I had really I was just like chronically a bucket of sweat all the time. I had really, really bad night sweats. I feel like there was just 2 years where I just did not sleep at all, where, I was just the walking wet dead. And my sleep has radically improved. I'm not having as many hot flashes. Like, I'm actually really not. So, it does kind of seem like things seem to be resolving a little bit. I mean, it's interesting because most of my life, I always felt like my body did not like hormones, period, like sex hormones. Like, when I would try to take birth control pills, my body hated them. I had really, really, really bad periods. I tried sometimes to do like a progesterone thing to try and make that better. Nope, terrible. And often I kind of felt like I have an estrogen imbalance problem. Like, I feel like I have too much of it. And so, one of the things is, as I kind of got into later perimenopause, I was noticing that a lot of the stuff that was happening to other people in later perimenopause that was bothering them was not happening to me. And it still isn't. Like, I'm not having a lot of the dryness stuff that people are having. I am still having some problems with migraines, which is usually kind of an estrogen problem. So I think, quite frankly, I might have been right, which might actually equip me to be particularly well in postmenopause for a while, which for me, especially as somebody that like I said, I've never done well on taking any kind of hormone medication. And particularly my mother had estrogen sensitive breast cancer. So I wouldn't. Testosterone is probably the only thing I'd consider taking, since other things are either dangerous or I've had a bad experience. But so that's where I'm at.
I really encourage people to read your chapter on hormones. I just feel like, which chapter is that? Well, it was the ride the estrogenic ricochet section was just helpful to just understand how the hormones are actually working in your body, the effects of the shifting hormones, and then to have a better understanding then of, for people who do decide to add hormones into their system, to understand a little bit better how that works. And I actually would really love to talk to you about this, because I have people on this podcast who are bringing in a multitude of perspectives, which I love. And my whole reason for doing this was really to learn more about perimenopause and menopause and share with people as this learning happens. And I find myself really wondering, how do I feel about these different approaches? I had one guest who came on and is really a big fan of bioidentical hormones. I also have a history of breast cancer in my family. There's no way I'm going to do that. Like, no way. But it makes me think. You had a really great section in the book about thinking critically about all of the different marketing tools and tactics that are geared towards us in menopause, because it is true. If you are in your 40s, you're getting lots of stuff thrown your way. And it's hard sometimes to know what to believe. And especially because we're making quick decisions all the time. We don't have time to do the kind of really thoughtful research that you did for this book. And could you talk to us about some tips that you have for us so that as we are inundated with all of the ways to grapple with this time, how can we evaluate what might work for us? What are your tips?
Sure. I mean, I think one big thing is, like, I would be on the lookout for a lot of stuff that says that it's menopause specific, right? Because, when you look at all of it, there's not really a whole lot that we might need or might benefit us that really is menopause specific. I mean, like, our needs in this are not necessarily about menopause in this ginormous big sphere way. We're all going to have very specific needs because we're impacted by this in a different way, right? Like, you might have blood pressure issues that come up, and I might have bone issues that come up in this. Again, somebody might have dermatological issues that come up for them that don't come up for me. Somebody might have vulvovaginal issues that come up, while for somebody else, they don't have those issues that come up at all. And for any of those things can usually happen at other stages of life, not necessarily just because of menopause. So, I mean, when we're talking about things, healthcare providers, in that way, it kind of makes sense, right? That sometimes, especially when people are not finding that they're served well by their general practitioners, or if they've been seeing an OB-GYN around stuff and their OB-GYN is definitely more on the OB side of the GYN stuff, then it kind of makes sense to be like, I would like somebody that specializes and is educated more in menopause. That makes sense. But when it comes to stuff, supplements, products, your diet. I mean, don't even get me started.
I want to get started. I actually want to talk about the diet.
We can go there later, right? Like your diet, your exercise program, all of this stuff. Like, it's just these things. I mean, I think really it makes more sense to say, what are the things that are happening to me in this, and what do I need for them? But I think the things that say, anything that suggests that it's good for everything in menopause is like, because everything in menopause is like so many things. Nothing could be good for everything in menopause. I mean, like, except to not be experiencing menopause, and nothing can do that. Like, there is no, like, and you're not in menopause anymore. That's not a thing. Even for people that want to and can do hormone therapies don't even help with everything. Hormone therapies help really well with a couple limited things, so there's nothing that's everything. So I think anything that says that it's for everything, not so much, and anything that says that it's for everybody is really another one. That's something else. I think that you also kind of have to, I mean, for me, I want to see some sensitivity to the fact that this is, from perimenopause through postmenopause, this is decades of our life. So if somebody who's trying to sell us stuff has no sensitivity to what something is going to cost us, I mean, I'm like, fuck you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But we have to get through this. So whatever it is, if it's something that costs a lot of money and there just doesn't seem to really be awareness or sensitivity about what that is, or concern or anything, that I need to see people looking out for us. Especially if it's that kind of marketing, we're one of you. Somebody who's one of me should have my back, rather than be trying to just profit off of me. And if they are, then I want to see them be aware of my needs and my limitations. I want to see ways that they're also serving our community. And this is a big market. So if somebody's doing things in ways that they're having a profit, I also want to see ways that they're offering service to our community that isn't just profit-based. What are they doing for free, or what are they doing to share some of the profit? And that's another big thing. Yeah, I mean, those are just the things off the top of my head.
Those are good things. And I would say that whole idea of what are people doing to serve that doesn't necessarily make them a profit is something that expands. As you said, if it's just about menopause, it's probably not so worthy. Nothing is going to be that specific. I would say also that we can extend that value judgment of, hey, I want to see how this person, this company, this team is offering a greater value beyond a profit generating value. So that's great. You mentioned the diet word, and you quote Hannah Blank several times in your book, and I love it. Can we talk about bodies? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it. I love Hannah. Hannah is one of my oldest and dearest, and Hannah's brilliant. And yeah, if you want to start reading somebody good about bodies, Hannah is an excellent person's work to start with. I think that one of the things is something that you hear a lot of people say, and it's really real, is they'll say, if this has even been their journey, right? For a lot of people, this hasn't even been their journey. But for some people, they'll say they went through this really rough journey of trying to make some kind of peace with their body. And then they got to be about 35, 40, and they got there. And then perimenopause happened. And then their body started to change again. And then all that acceptance and the self-acceptance that they got, and that peace that they got, and their feeling hot or whatever it was, all was like shot to hell. And now they're like, oh, it's all gone. And, certainly some of that is about body changes and body changes that often look, if people were feeling that way, some of it was probably about self-acceptance. Some of it might have been about meeting certain beauty standards. And some of it with the changes would be about changes happening that are not in alignment with beauty standards, be those about aging, be those about body shape, any of those things. There's really no beauty standard in which, everybody's like, covered in sweat in the not sexy way. Like you don't really see those kinds of pictures anywhere ever. Maybe we need to make that a thing. But I think another thing that often kind of goes unnoticed or unspoken or like just, I don't know, like, we're so easy to blame our bodies first, and be angry at ourselves and our bodies first. Well, that's not your body's fault. Right? Like, why are you mad at your body? Why did that get shot to hell? Well, that got shot to hell, again, in part because, one, we're in this culture that there is no support for this ever-changing body that can be this multitude of shapes and sizes, will undoubtedly be this multitude of shapes and sizes, not just person to person, but one person in their whole life. But also that in this particular period of time, once you hit this time, especially if changes are happening, you are then going to be hit with a barrage of marketing to tell you something is the matter, and here's how you fix it, and you need to fix it, and you better fix it. And there's, both beauty standard, you better fix it, and healthism, you better fix it, right? You better fix it because you'll be unattractive and unappealing, but also you better fix it because, oh God, you'll have a heart attack or, and it's really these things combine also with that other, like, if you gone through any kind of journey of getting through your adolescence, getting through your 20s and being like, okay, I'm finally at a place where I either feel good or I at least feel a little better. And then it got challenged again. It's the perfect storm. And like we were talking about a little bit before we ran, when this is also really paired with a lot of like, oh no, your health. Oh no, exercise. Oh God, you're super racist. BMI. You have to look out right now. This all gets there. There's, I know because I look more than I should at my book sales. When you look at book lists for menopause, half of them are diets.
Yeah, they are.
And they're in the top list. So those are being bought, right? It's not just that those are being produced. Those books are being purchased, and they're being purchased at great volume. As I mentioned in the book, we are at the second highest risk for eating disorders after adolescence. And it's for very similar reasons. We are just as much marketed to change our bodies. We are just as much shown images of our bodies that are unrealistic and unattainable. We just as much are in periods of our life where our bodies and so much of the rest of our lives are spiraling out of our control, right? And food and how we eat is something that we can control, or we think we can control anyway. We are rewarded by our culture for controlling it, right? Like everybody's going to congratulate you for being on a diet, even if you don't have the results you're supposed to, quote unquote, right? For dieting, you're always congratulated for trying to do what you can to be on a diet. So, it's rough going.
Do you think that that's a particularly Western culture issue? Do you know? I'm just curious.
I'm really like, I'm so tethered in my attention to Western culture that I'm just probably not really the best person to ask. I mean, yes, that's my sense, but also that's kind of, even as somebody that works internationally in the sex ed space, that's so much more of what I pay attention to. But look, we're also where the biggest, this is where diet culture makes its biggest profits. Right? Like, I mean, this is where the cash cow of all of this lives. Nobody makes money from this stuff like we make money from this stuff, particularly in the United States. So, that is what it is. But it's one of these things where, hopefully, I feel like that's one of the things where if you can do it, this is hopefully a good menopausal bridge, of all the giving less of a fuck things. The you're going to have the body that you're going to have, post menopause. Look, unless you spend every dime you have on this stuff, on your appearance, and every minute that you have at the gym or whatever. And, I know that there are people that have that ability and that desire, and, it is what it is. We all make our choices and do what we do, but that's not even within most people's abilities. By and large, for most of us, we're going to have the body that we're going to have. And again, that's both about genetics. It's also about things like our health conditions, our abilities. And the older that we get, the more that it just kind of is what it is, and so acceptance of our bodies just becomes one of these things where it's just kind of make it or break it. The older that we get, the more it's just either we're going to accept our bodies, and feel better, or we're going to dig in and keep feeling worse and worse as the years go by. And, to me, that the latter is just an impossible proposition.
Yeah.
Especially when we can't get away from that. Life is hard enough. Like, there's enough hard stuff in life, and some of it, at least, we can compartmentalize or we can get away with, but we live in here. We live in these vessels. We can't escape them. And if we hate them all the time, it's really miserable.
There are sort of 3 takeaways from that section in your book that have really stuck with me since that day sitting on the floor of the Barnes & Noble. And I'm sorry for my local bookstore for not being at my local bookstore. Number 1 is, and I believe I'm getting this right, that more women die from complications from anorexia in menopausal years than in teen years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 2 was the suggestion about when you're talking to your medical provider, not getting weighed. And that was revelatory for me, honestly. It's just such a thing. And I hate getting weighed, and it always sort of triggers something. And I realized I don't have to. That just moment of empowerment.
Yeah, that's so many people, so many of us have that experience. I feel like probably almost everybody hates it. I'm sure that there's some people that don't, but
Yeah.
because there's no everybody for everything. But most people, I feel like, really, really hate it for all the reasons, and more times than not, it is literally unnecessary. We do not need to be weighed.
I think you just took 80% of the pain of going to the doctor out of going to the doctor for me. Can you do the same for the dentist? If you can do that for the dentist, then we're all good.
Yeah. Can't help there. Just find the dentist that you...
Drugs. Just drugs. And number 3 was, and this is one that I think about every day, which is the pretty privilege. And just being more aware of when... First of all, I never have thought of myself as being that pretty. I've always wanted to be more, right? There's always been that thing. And recently I had a really great person who I had a conversation with, and he said, "How come you never age? You just never seem to age." And I realized, oh, this is part of the pretty privilege, right? This is what I'm coming up against. And when he said that, the first thought that I had with this was this swelling of pride, which then I had to think about and is really disconcerting, right? Like, why am I feeling, that's nothing, what? That's nothing to be proud of. It's a thing. And then the second feeling was this fear of no matter what, you're running against the clock, right? And then, of course, the third thought is release it. Just try releasing it and sitting with both of those feelings and getting curious around it and letting that go. So I think about it all the time. I think about it when people like an Instagram post that's a picture, and when someone holds the door open, or the other side of that is invisibility, which you also write about in the book. And I'd love to talk about that as well, too, because I am beginning to really notice the invisibility factor coming in. And I keep looking for the superpower in it.
It's weird for me. I don't like being the center of attention. I've never liked being the center of attention. And I found myself, the work that I do with sex ed, I kind of came into it kind of thinking I could, like, I didn't really think that I would have to be the center of attention. I thought I could just be like answering letters. Like I didn't envision kind of the way that it would form itself. And even writing books, the process of writing books, you're just home alone writing books, then you have to market books and you have to do all this stuff, but you don't really think about that when you're writing books. And I know that I know a bunch of different people that write books, and I have friends that don't really like the writing part, that really like the product part and the selling part. To me, I wish I could just write them and then they would be like done and I didn't have to sell it. Like, I don't, that stuff's not really, it's not really the stuff that I like. And so, to some degree, there's a relief for me, right? Like, in kind of being like, okay, like I can do that. I can maybe just kind of slink along. And I think as an abuse survivor, like an assault survivor, like I'm kind of hoping, and waiting for kind of that, like that feels potentially protective. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe that'll give me a feeling of safety, that kind of anonymity. I don't know. It's interesting. I've noticed that I'm like, when I see kind of people put up younger pictures of themselves, I had an era of my life when I did pinup stuff, and I'm feeling really weird about putting up, like, I don't really put up older pictures. Like, I like being the age that I am, and I'm not really here for the comparison, in part because I think people say those kinds of things because they feel like they should, whether or not it's true. And I don't even know if it is, and I don't even want to think about if it is, because I don't know if I care or not. I don't know that I've really thought about if I care or not. But I know that I don't want to care, is to say, oh, you still look however it is, right? But then it opens up even that conversation, or that people think you need that conversation, right? And it's just like, oh God, it's such a tiresome thing. Even if that's not why the arc is there. Maybe the arc is there because it's just, we're our own history, right? We like that we have history, but you can't even say, isn't it cool that I've gotten older? Even if you want to be able to look older, a lot of the times people won't necessarily kind of let you have that. They'll tell you that you still look so young, even if you know that you don't, or even if you don't want to, even if you're like, no, I don't. You still look 20, right? From somebody that you're like, I do not still look 20. And I don't want to look 20. Please stop saying that to me.
I think that we are going to have fluctuating feelings about these issues always. But it is an opportunity to get curious around it, so that when this lovely gentleman said, how come you never age? You look so young. I can think, what feels more true to me? Like, what do I think he was really trying to say? I think he was really trying to say, it's great to see you. You're bringing some energy into this moment, right? Like, that's, I think, what he meant. And it just makes me think, how can I share more of that with the people in my life and give myself that grace too, that is not tied to age. One of the other things that you talk about, I love that you dedicate a whole chapter of the book to relationships in menopause, because of course it doesn't just affect us, it affects all the people around us. Can you tell us a little bit about some thoughts that you have for people to handle relationships during this time?
Sure. Yeah. We definitely need to not kill other people. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because even that one awful snippet from that Robert Wilson book where he's talking about that mobster that comes in and is talking about how he literally is thinking about killing his menopausal wife. I mean, I feel like for a long time, the the narrative was certainly like, how will we tolerate these menopausal people, right? Like that's really what it was. Like somehow the people suffering the most were not those of us who are actually in the thing, but the people around us, right? Which is just, I mean, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's like, I had a friend over here the other day talking about depression, and there are very similar narratives around depression and the idea that people around a depressed person are somehow suffering more than the depressed person themselves, which is, of course, ridiculous. So, for sure, it can, especially if we're having a hard time, be difficult for everyone. Absolutely. Right. But the person for whom it is going to be the most difficult is the person whose body and mind it is happening in. I mean, certainly education and information for everybody helps. I think that something that certainly makes it the most difficult for every relationship is any kind of silence around it, right? I mean, if we're going through something that's in any way challenging, even a little challenging, and we are not telling the other people in our life, then of course that's going to make our relationship more challenging. If we're upset, we're tired, we're confused, we're having executive function problems. I mean, any of the things that can be happening to us in this, and the other person doesn't understand why, and we're not telling them why. There's just a host of ways that can have a bad impact on our relationship, also make our experience in perimenopause and menopause more difficult. So I think that telling people, and one of the things that Dr. Lex James and I were talking about in the book too, is that I think there's this idea that it's not acceptable to talk to kids about, but it is, just like it's acceptable to talk about menstruation, just like it's acceptable to talk about pregnancy, just like it's acceptable to talk about if you're sick, about sex, any of these things, explaining what this is and what might just, you have a little talk about it. This is what it is. These are the kinds of things that can happen to somebody in it. I might have some moods. I might need some extra space and time. I might be a little less patient than normal. I might need some help from you. I might need you to do some more things than you normally do while I'm going through this. Any of these things. Just, that's it. That's not, I mean, like literally, that could be a 15-minute conversation. It's just not even that complicated. And then when something is going on, then it's as simple as being like, this is what's going on. I'm having a hot flash. I'm having a bad day. I'm depressed right now. I'm having anxiety right now. Any of these things. As you know, I'm a big proponent of extra space, whether that be physical space, emotional space, both, any of these things. I think that most of us really need it. Certainly if you don't need it or want it, you don't have to have it. But I think building it in for everybody, not just necessarily for one person. The story that Kimberly Dark told about her partner that was in menopause, that they slept together, and her partner was saying it was fine because that she could adjust her whole work schedule, but Kimberly, who was not at that time in menopause, who could not be sleeping, like I think that maybe Kimberly might have liked to have had like an extra bed somewhere, even though Kimberly was not the person in menopause, right? So sometimes making extra space for more than just us can be helpful, because maybe we're not the one that needs space. Maybe the other person involved needs some space. You never really know. I think that another thing is that it is not particularly uncommon for this to be a time when a lot of things that have been harboring underground in our relationships come home to roost, and so I think that nobody should be surprised if that happens. For one, it might even just be something that you kind of prepare yourself for. I think that if that's the case, now could be as good a time as any for family therapy or couples therapy. If you're not in therapy yourself and you don't want to have, you want to have therapy about your relationships, but not in your relationships, that can be a thing to do. I think that another thing that can happen a lot of the times is that, and I talk about this in the book, is that inequities that have existed for a long time in relationships that have been tolerated, up until now, can all of a sudden just become intolerable and then change them. I think that sometimes people can feel like if they've tolerated inequities for a long time, they have to just suck it up and keep things as they are, because then it's status quo. But I just call bullshit. There's never anything in a relationship, no matter how long something has gone on, there's never a certain amount of time that then you don't have a right to ask for it to change. You always have a right to ask for change. Always. You also always have a right to leave and get out of something if something is no longer working for you. So maybe you need a change, you ask for it, and the other person won't give it to you. Well, maybe you don't stay in that relationship anymore. This is also a time of life when people can make some pretty seismic changes. It's another thing I talk about. You often will hear people describe it as people blowing up their lives. And then, a lot of times, kind of from where I'm sitting, when I look at these stories, a lot of those things don't really look like people blowing up their life. It looks like people actually redesigning their life in a way that looks like it works a lot better for them.
It's a great opportunity to do that. And I do love how you do honor the process of sploding. Yeah, life sploding. Yeah. Really, really nice. And that also, and we won't get into this too much now, but I do encourage people to read the book, because that also conveys to sexual relationships and intimacy too. Your exploration of sexuality post-menopause feels very exciting and hopeful, and it feels related to that, right? That you start to have a better sense of what you need, that it's an opportunity to really take stock of what do you need and to get better at communicating that too.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like with a lot of this, there really is so much opportunity. There's something about, something like this happening that can show you, oh, this is going on. I don't have what I need, or this is going on. It's not going to work. And what I have happening, what do I do now? Because, some of these things are temporary. That's the good news, right? But some of them aren't. Some of them this is changing and now it's going to be this way. So if something isn't working right now, you're going to need to change it so that it can work, maybe for even the rest of your life. And I think also too, it's like, especially if we're feeling crummy in this and this makes us feel bad, if when we're physically feeling bad we can do something in our lives or for ourselves that is positive, it can really counteract that, like, okay, well, I might be tired and I might feel bloated and crabby and sweaty, but I can be energized by this new thing that I'm doing for myself that I really want and, like, I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you say, I think there's somewhere in there that you say it's time to take up a habit, like a new hobby that's really out there and random or something. I can't remember exactly what you said.
Something, it's, again, this is, you're entering a new phase of life, and you can, if you want to keep things the same and it works for you to keep things the same, that's fine too. There's not like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay too. If that works for you and that's what you want, cool. That's great. But if it's not what you want, shit's changing anyway, so sometimes when things are changing anyway, it's almost like, well, you might as well, because everything's all over the place anyway. When everything's kind of running amok and things are in chaos, sometimes it kind of pays to just go ahead and be a chaos agent.
Yes. We're almost out of time. So I just love for you to, this is a hard question, I know, but if you had one thing that you felt like people who are going through perimenopause should know or do, what would it be?
Oh gosh, that is really hard. I mean, I think, it's not really hard for everybody, right? And so this is not going to be relevant for people for whom it's not really hard. But I think that if it winds up being really hard and you're not prepared for it, it really, it's so overwhelming, especially if you already have a difficult life. And so I think that doing whatever you can do for yourself, especially if it's challenging, whatever you can do to just put everything down and tend to it and tend to yourself. And even if it's like you are on semi-sabbatical for things, if you need to, even if you think about it as being like, I'm on disability for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, for 5 years. I mean, it's for as long as it is. I feel like it's one of these things where if it's really hard and things are going to hell, if we don't really take care of ourselves in this, we've got decades after this potentially to get through. So if at the end of this we are just run through, we're not going to make it, we're not going to make it, or we're just going to be so physically and emotionally and psychologically just depleted, that what's on the other side, it's just gonna be impossible, and I know it's hard. Like I really do. I'm somebody with limited resources. I didn't come into life with things. I don't have a lot of family support. I don't have things like that. So I get that, for me, that kind of thing has meant, choosing to live lean and a bunch of different things. But I think that as much as you possibly can to really just kind of be like, oh, shoot, okay, I gotta just put stuff down and take care of myself and say no to things. And, it's like camp me. I just, I'm just going to go to camp me for a while.
I love that. I think it's really wise. I'd like to go to camp me.
Yeah. I mean, and again, you might be limited. Obviously, we're all probably limited in how much we can do it, but however much we can do it. I think, yeah, life is hard sometimes. So, and you just don't know what's coming around the corner to have to deal with. God, that's been like my last couple of years, is that I'm like, Jesus, just when I think I've dealt with it all, I just get another blow. So you gotta wrap up.
Yeah, you do. You do. Well, I'm glad that you've made it to the other side of menopause. It's hopeful. You've given me hope.
I know. I kept being like, I'll believe it when I see it.
And I think we'll all be celebrating that for you. So thank you for leading the way. Here are my key takeaways from this conversation with Heather Corinna. The beauty industry and the health industry are money-making ventures that prey upon our insecurities. There is no denying this. When we feel bad about how our bodies look, it is because our culture wants us to feel crappy so that we spend money to fix what doesn't fit. And that's as true of the menopausal body as it is of other bodies. you don't have to get weighed at your doctor's office. And although we didn't discuss it specifically here, you can also request for the doctor or nurse not to reveal your weight to you if you still want to be weighed, but just don't want to know how much you weigh. Y'all, I stopped weighing myself a year ago, and it has been revelatory. Just stepping on a scale can be a deterrent for getting medical care. So see how you feel about taking that out of the equation if it's a block for you. Prepare yourself for shifts in relationships. Know that you are not alone if you're finding yourself feeling more aware and less tolerant of inequities. You always have the right to ask for change. There's so much good information in this book. Follow me on Instagram over at The Lovely Unbecoming and join me at the free and private Facebook discussion group for the Pause to Go podcast, where I'll be posting very brief readings from this book all week long. DM me if you can't find it. There's so much to track in social media these days, but you can just shoot me a message and I'll connect you with the content you want. And as always, if you're interested in working with me as a coach to make the most of your life's transitions, check out my website at thelovelyunbecoming.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Pause to Go podcast. If you got something out of this episode, let us know. Share it with a friend, join our Facebook group, and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts if you loved it. If not, no worries. We want you to tell it like it is, and we'd love to have your input. If you want to know more about what I'm up to, you can follow me on Instagram at The Lovely Unbecoming or at my website, thelovelyunbecoming.com. Stay curious, y'all.